On this Friday night, pleas for reform and a remedy. The pressure piling on Canada's healthcare system. People are gradually losing faith in how we can provide these critical type services. And how heartbroken families are trying to trigger improvements. The federal Conservative leader on air travel.
The airlines think they can get away with mistreating us.
And the rising cost of living. Our wide-ranging interview with Pierre Poilievre. Rare twisters in January.
Look at that tornado.
The deadly and destructive storm striking the southern U.S. Plus, mourning a member of rock and roll royalty. The turbulent life of Lisa Marie Presley.
Global National with Farah Nasser.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. Waiting in an emergency room is an excruciating experience for anyone. But waiting for care while you're dying is unimaginable. This week, we learned of two separate cases where Nova Scotia women died after sitting in the ER for more than 6 hours. One, a mother of three. The other, a grandmother, showing us the human cost of an HR crisis in hospital ERs and shaking the trust of Canadians. In our top story tonight, Ross Lord speaks to a family member trying a new tactic to force accountability and change in our healthcare system.
Charlene Snow was known for her great sense of humor and her compassion. She spent Christmas fighting through flu-like symptoms lasting more than a week before finally agreeing to go to a crowded Cape Breton emergency department.
After approximately, I'd say 7 hours, she had a chat with some staff members and asked, realistically, when would I see a doctor? And they said likely it won't be until tomorrow morning.
Charlene decided to leave, planning to attend an urgent care clinic on December 31st.
But she didn't make it to the next morning. Freddie picked her up and they went home, and she died within the hour.
Doctors say her death was caused by a buildup of fluid on her heart. Hers is the second Nova Scotia family in a week to go public. Mother of three Alison Holtoff died in a hospital ER in the town of Amherst. Her husband says she also waited for 7 hours, not receiving the care she needed until it was too late.
It was getting worse. She wasn't doing good. She was in pain, and there was not much of a response. We're doing what we can. We don't have any beds.
They're the latest victims of a chronic shortage of nurses, doctors, and hospital beds at a time when more patients need care. The tipping point accelerated since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic.
It's really reached a level of crisis. The problems that we're seeing are not just happening once in a while. It's a daily event.
In a letter to all health ministers in Canada, the Association of Emergency Physicians says our health system needs immediate interventions to ensure its survival. The emergency doctors blame politics and bureaucracies, saying by failing to protect emergency department resources for patients, we're contributing to multiple avoidable deaths across the country daily.
What's happening is people are gradually losing faith in how we can provide these critical type services. They're losing their faith one patient at a time.
To force accountability, Charlene Snow's family has established a website to collect other healthcare horror stories from patients, families, and from frontline workers.
It has been totally overwhelming. It has been heartwarming. It has been touching. I've cried so many times reading people's stories, and I just can't believe that it's happened to so many other people.
In a statement, the federal health ministry expressed condolences for the Nova Scotia deaths and says it's ready to collaborate with provinces and territories to improve health services for all Canadians. Nova Scotia's progressive Conservatives swept to power on a promise to fix health care. More than a year later, the grim reality is forcing Premier Tim Houston to soften his language.
We knew that the challenge would be significant. It is significant, but we're focused on it.
To some, there's been a shift from how to improve health care to how to keep it from collapsing. Ross Lord, Global News.
It's been a little more than 4 months since Pierre Poilievre took the reins of Canada's federal Conservative Party. And since then, the new Tory leader has not made it a habit of speaking regularly with large media outlets. But today, Poilievre did agree to an interview with Global News after delivering a speech at Winnipeg's Frontier Centre for Public Policy. Melissa Ridgen conducted that interview, and she joins us. Melissa, what stood out to you in your conversation with Poilievre?
Well, as you said, it was a crowd at Frontier Center for Public Policy lunch here. 500 people were there. Lots of people, you would think would be preaching to the base. It's a right-wing think tank, but not everybody in the crowd was of that ilk necessarily. I think that there was a lot of people in there just looking to have conversations and hear something new about that sort of voices what the frustration that a lot of people are feeling across this country. Air travel, that chaos, that had come up, of course. He, not surprisingly, placed the blame at the foot of the federal Liberals, saying that they are in charge, they regulate this industry, and any chaos that ensues is their fault.
We have very little competition, and that's why the airlines think they can get away with mistreating us. Airlines are federal responsibility. They're federally regulated. Airports are federally mandated. And under Justin Trudeau, our airlines and our airports have been a disaster, an absolute disaster.
Melissa, Poilievre and the Conservatives have been channeling a lot of frustrations that Canadians are feeling right now. So what did he tell you about those concerns?
Well, he listed a litany of frustrations that he's heard as he's, talking to Canadians. The same as the Liberal government makes their way across talking to Canadians, and they would have their take, or their take of what Canadians are feeling would certainly be different than what Mr. Poilievre is saying that he's felt. But something that has come up, not surprisingly, the cost of living. That's something that we're all feeling the pinch of. He said that is, you kind of fanned the flames, I guess you could say, that's only going to get worse, which is what a lot of people fear.
The Liberals and NDP want to triple the carbon tax on your heat, your gas, your groceries. That's going to crush families. I won't allow it. I'm going to get rid of the carbon tax and fight climate change with technology, not taxes.
So there was a lot more that he had to say. We tackled a lot of topics from reconciliation to how to address climate change and the path forward from, this pinch that we're all feeling. How long is it going to last? What are the fixes? So there was a lot more to this interview that we will share with you.
Melissa Virgin in Winnipeg. Thank you, Melissa. Today is an important day for Indigenous survivors traumatized by Canada's Indian Day school system. The deadline to apply to be part of a class action lawsuit to be compensated for the years of abuse they suffered in those institutions is set at midnight tonight. As Neetu Garcha explains, it's a task far easier said than done for many victims as they're forced to visit their agonizing experiences once again.
That's my daddy. He was the chief of Skadans.
Andy Wilson is sitting in front of a framed photo of his father, who, along with his mother, survived residential school. Wilson was in kindergarten when he went to a similar but less talked about institution of assimilation known as Indian Day School.
It was just as traumatic as the residential schools.
Like many, he grew up struggling to cope with the trauma from the abuse he suffered there and later grappled with alcoholism.
I still see a lot of people suffering.
Canada signed a $1.47 billion settlement with survivors of the more than 600 day schools that operated across Canada between 1863 and 2000. Midnight Friday is the deadline to apply. But in order to determine compensation between $10,000 and $200,000, the paperwork requires victims to detail their abuse. Wilson, who was compensated last year, says it was like reliving the trauma.
I had to do it 3 times. And I had to do it with my wife, who helped me get through it.
So many people in this country look at it as adults that are applying. But they don't seem to remember that these were kids when they were being raped. They were being beaten, sexually abused in these schools.
Over 178,000 claims have been filed since the start of the process 3 years ago, more than 1,000 during the 6-month extension period after July 13, 2022. Of those, about 70% have been paid. In a statement, the Federal Crown Indigenous Relations Ministry said in part, compensation and deadlines were negotiated by the parties and approved by the courts. Canada cannot unilaterally amend the claims period deadline.
The model of the Indian Act and how it was used to develop apartheid system in South Africa, you can really see what the whole colonial agenda was for the last 150, 200 years.
They're calling for a complete removal of the deadline, resources to support survivors who apply, as well as better understanding from the public about the day school experience and the lasting effects of it. Neetu Garcha, Global News.
There is some support for survivors. A 24-hour crisis line is available for anyone experiencing pain or distress as a result of their experience. You can call toll-free and speak in confidence at 1-800-721-0066. Get ready for more potential delays and disruptions at Canadian airports in eastern Canada. Severe weather is blanketing large parts of the region.
Today, the best piece of advice would be to stay home. If you can work from home, that would be perfect.
A winter storm closed several schools and led to travel chaos in some parts of southern Quebec today. Wintry weather warnings also stretched into parts of Ottawa and the GTA, with more snow expected in some parts of eastern Canada overnight. In Atlantic Canada, a mix of snow and freezing rain also shut down schools in New Brunswick and PEI, while rainfall and possibly damaging wind warnings are in effect for parts of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland and Labrador. A terrifying close call in the southern U.S. after a major storm system slammed the region on Thursday and spawned reports of at least 35 tornadoes across several states. At least 9 people were killed in the severe weather. Alabama's historic city of Selma wasn't spared from the devastation after a large tornado ripped through the key symbol of the 1960s American Civil Rights Movement. Jackson Prosco looks at the damage after this latest weather event, endangering Americans.
Oh my God.
With little warning, a rare mid-January tornado outbreak pummeled the American South.
You could hear the roar, glass going everywhere. You could hear the roof literally being torn off right over our heads.
The storms cut a wide swath across multiple states. One of the twisters stayed on the ground for nearly 80 kilometers.
And it slammed my front door so hard. And it slammed me so hard. Ooh, Lord, it just scared the daylight saving time out of me.
Historic Selma, Alabama took the brunt of it. Buildings crumpled, homes flattened.
This was my mom's house.
And in the aftermath, fires raged out of control.
They tore off the chimney, flipped the car. I mean, it's bad down here, like Louisiana. It's bad.
In Georgia, at least 2 people were killed, including a 5-year-old boy, crushed by a falling tree.
We know we've had multiple tornadoes across the state. The damage is, literally statewide in different places.
Across the U.S., 2023 is off to a brutal start. In flood-ravaged California, they're only now getting a full picture of the damage from weeks of back-to-back storms that have overwhelmed the state with heavy rain.
Right now, statewide precipitation is 153% of average for the water year to date.
More torrential rain and dangerous winds are expected this weekend, leading to more warnings about flooding and mudslides. Back in Alabama, thousands are still without power just as temperatures take a brutal plunge. The storms left behind millions of dollars in damage and the promise of weeks of recovery. Jackson Prosco, Global News.
Former U.S. President Donald Trump's family empire has been ordered to pay $1.6 million for evading taxes for years. It's the maximum fine allowed. 2 companies affiliated with the Trump organization were convicted last month on 17 charges, including criminal tax fraud and falsifying business records. The charges were based on a scheme in which executives were paid in gifts like luxury cars and private school tuition, and it was all kept off the books. Nobody's expected to go to jail, and there is no risk of the Trump real estate business going under, but this is the first ever criminal conviction of one of Trump's companies. There are new details tonight about the blast that rocked an Ontario city. Coming up, the tragic outcome of this early morning explosion. In Ontario, the man critically injured in a series of explosions at a hazardous waste facility yesterday has died. Police say they're not releasing his identity because his family is still being notified. The man was in his 30s and was the lone worker at the facility in St. Catharines when the explosions happened. He was transferred to hospital with serious burns. Crews are working to secure the scene before an investigation can begin. It's expected to take 7 to 10 days to pinpoint the cause. And at least 3 people are still missing following a fire explosion at a propane factory in Quebec. It happened Thursday morning in Saint-Roch de la Chagane, about 50 kilometers north of Montreal. After searching the scene last night, police said today they can't be sure there are only 3 victims. The investigation could take days due to dangerous materials on site, and their search efforts are now being hampered by a snowstorm. The cause of the explosion is still unclear, but police don't believe it's suspicious or criminal in nature. Ahead, the claims that could mean a major victory for Russia in Ukraine. A surgeon in Ukraine likely took a few extra deep breaths before removing a live grenade stuck in a soldier's chest. The grenade was lodged right beneath his heart. It was about 4 centimeters long. The surgery had to be performed without a commonly used technique that controls bleeding with electricity. The soldier is now recovering. Ukraine is denying Russian claims that its troops have captured the key salt mining town of Soledar. If true, it is the first battlefield victory for the Kremlin in months. It would also give Russia a new staging point for the bigger battle over the entire Donbass region in the east. As Crystal Gamansing reports, it's also the second time this week Russians have made the bold claim.
Ukrainian border guards shared multiple videos of battles in and around Soledar, a move to demonstrate the fighting is ongoing. Global News cannot independently verify when these images were recorded or the exact locations. Russia's defense ministry spokesperson announced Friday its regular forces took the town, saying full control allows Russia to cut off Ukrainian supplies and soldiers going to Bakhmut. But on Wednesday, the private Russian mercenary group Wagner said its soldiers had captured Soledar, highlighting potential divisions within Russian ranks. Ukraine says all of the claims are untrue, that Soledar has not fallen. While addressing Lithuanian lawmakers, Volodymyr Zelensky said the aggressor must be defeated on Ukrainian land so that we don't have to fight on the land of other European peoples. Hot is how battles have been described in Soledar, just like in nearby Bakhmut, which has seen some of the most intense and deadly fighting. There are still hundreds of residents in Soledar. Most have spent their days hidden away in the few buildings left standing. If Russia's claim is true, it would be the first victory for the Kremlin since July. Ukraine, aided by Western weapons, launched swift counteroffensives and drove out invading forces from nearly all of Kharkiv Oblast and Kherson. That city was liberated in November, but that hasn't stopped Russian missile strikes. Much of what's happening in the east is shared by officials or those linked to Ukrainian volunteer groups to social media, some of which show jaw-dropping battles in this nearly year-long war. Crystal Gamansing, Global News, London.
A life in the spotlight, but filled with grief. Next, looking back at Lisa Marie Presley's 54 years. She was famous from the day she was born. The only child of Elvis Presley, Lisa Marie Presley, died last night at just 54 years old. According to reports, she had gone into cardiac arrest. As Mike Armstrong explains, hers was a life lived weathering multiple tragedies, to the point Presley herself said she was lucky she made it as far as she did.
It was clear something was wrong. Lisa Marie Presley at the Golden Globes Tuesday appeared somewhat out of sorts in this interview.
I just photobomb you?
While in another, she leaned on her date for support.
Yeah, I'm going to grab your arm. Yes.
Presley hasn't been seen much in recent months. There were interviews to promote the movie about her father's life, but since losing her son to suicide in 2020. She's been reclusive, living in what she's called grief's unrelenting grip. Presley did appear at Graceland last week for what would have been Elvis's 88th birthday. She told the fans in attendance they were the reason she was there.
I keep saying you're the only people that can bring me out of my house. I'm not kidding.
Presley was pronounced dead in hospital. According to reports, she was found at home unconscious by her housekeeper. Her mother, Priscilla, issued a statement saying the family is, quote, shocked and devastated by the tragic death of their beloved Lisa Marie. Presley was born in 1968, the daughter of the king of rock and roll. She was the most famous baby in the world at the time. Her parents would divorce when she was just 4. When Elvis died in 1977, Lisa Marie was 9. She was at Graceland that morning and lived through days of what she called pandemonium. Presley followed in her father's footsteps. She released 3 albums. It would have been easier, she said, not to go into the family business of music, but she didn't have a choice.
You know, naturally, that's just where my heart is, where my interest is. So, and I feel it's important in the world, so I do it.
Presley was married 4 times, including to another singer, Michael Jackson, and actor Nicolas Cage. She leaves behind 3 daughters, one an accomplished actress, Riley Keough. It was a life with bitter divorces, a battle with a business manager that left her millions in debt, and struggles with addiction. But she's being remembered as someone who persevered. Presley would say she inherited her father's strength and rebelliousness. What she missed out on, she said, was the protection of a father.
And that's Global National for this Friday night. I'm Farah Nasser. On behalf of our whole crew, I want to thank you so much for spending part of your evening with us. Tonight's Your Canada is a covey of quail in Osoyoos, British Columbia. Until tomorrow, take care of yourselves and each other. Good night.